Okay. Hot on the heels of the first video that I've done for this, I'm going to be now talking about Grease instead of Singing in the Rain. Now, obviously, these are meant to be compared, but we'll get onto the specifics of the comparison question later. I mainly want to just focus on Grease as its own thing to start off with. So, obviously, question 2 will be the Grease question. Question 3 will be the comparison to Singing in the Rain. As I said on the Singing in the Rain video, they could ask you anything about Grease. They are expecting extended answers, and you should link to key scenes when you're discussing the film. Don't just talk about generic things, make sure you link it. Okay, in terms of genre questions then, now there are several things that you could do when it comes to Grease for genre, okay? And what I'm going to do is just type them in as we go, okay? So one of the things, obviously, is the use of singing and dancing, much like what you would find in Singing in the Rain. And this is obviously displaying its genre and showing that it's a typical musical. There's a slight twist on genre conventions in Grease, though, as I've mentioned here. You can apply both teen and musical to this. So we've got the singing and dancing of musicals, but we've also got, for example, the teen dramas of teen films. So that could be some of the areas such as teen pregnancy. Like the pregnancy scare, for example, the idea of sex, the idea of sort of growing up. All of those areas would be good things to mention in terms of typical genre conventions for teenage films. Okay. Now, this is an integrated musical, which means that all of the songs contribute to the story in some way. Arguably, you could say there's maybe one or two in Grease that don't, but for the vast majority of it, they contribute to the story. Okay, so integrated musical, it contributes to the story. You could also talk a little bit about how the idea of musical history and how musicals are used by audiences. So obviously, it's very uplifting. They're meant to be uplifting and happy and joyful. There are moments of sadness in Grease, and for example, there are worse things I could do. But in terms of how musicals are used by the audience and how they're absorbed, technically would count as a genre convention because it's the idea of it being uplifting and happy. Okay, so that's musical conventions. Now, in terms of mise en scène, there's lots of different areas that you could pick up on. Okay, so you've got costume, for example, with the Greasers, the Pink Ladies, and even things such as the poodle skirts and so on, okay? All of those areas link to the time period, but also they show what Grease is all about, which is this idea of nostalgia for the 1950s. Just as Singing in the Rain was a film in the 1950s set in the 1920s based on nostalgia, it's the same for Grease. It's from the 70s and has 70s issues, but covers them in a 50s guise because it really likes that nostalgic element. Okay, you've got props, for example, the greaser combs, things such as the Sandy cigarette towards the end, which is really important. You've got, for example, the use of any kind of props, even something as simple as grease lightning. The car, obviously, and using those elements to analyze what it was like back then. Obviously, grease lightning would be an element of Americana, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Obviously, you've got setting. Now, in this case, because it's set in a school, this is sort of an unusual setting for a musical, which means then that you can then address the fact that this is a teen musical, and that's why it's set in a school. It's appropriate for its setting, but it's not necessarily typical for the genre, okay? So that would work really well. Now, in terms of cinematography, there are lots of things that you could talk about. So if we focus on camera angles here, there are lots of close-ups and lots of what we would call ensemble shots, which is where all of the group are together to show their unity and show how they're unified. And that would be typical of a teen film to show them together. Think of things like Breakfast Club and so on. They all link with camera angles. Now, movements, there's lots of tracking, especially in the summer night sequence, and that is meant to display the focus being on Sandy and Danny, okay? Obviously, you've got lighting and color. It's very vibrant and high key because obviously you want to be able to see all of that dancing singing and the set pieces, especially when we look at You're the One That I Want. Okay, because in You're the One That I Want, they use that very powerful sequence set in a fairground. So quite a useful thing to keep in mind for cinematography. In terms of editing and sound, there is a use of something called superimposition, okay, and that is found in Summer Nights. Now, superimposition is where they project Sandy's face next to Danny, and it's meant to show this idea of unity or togetherness that it's doing at the same time. There's also quite a bit of cross-cutting, showing two things occurring at the same time. It helps develop the story. Yeah. And also it displays the differences between the two of them. Okay. So obviously with sound, you've got songs which link to the idea of an integrated musical, and they have some form of meaning. Okay. So that would work really well. And obviously you've got dialogue, which is very teen inspired, and links to that teenage audience. Yeah. Now, in terms of context, a lot of this is very similar to Singing in the Rain. So you've got the Hays Code, which was abolished at this time, which allowed the audience to observe more risky content. Okay, so they cover things such as, like we said earlier, sex, teen pregnancy, and sort of explicit conversations. Okay, so that's that done. Okay, the nostalgia for the 50s, and this is where I linked into Americana. Okay, things like the milkshakes, diners, sort of drive-in cinema. It's the idea of the teen as a consumer. Yeah, so so teens, sort of like the idea of a teenager came around in the 1950s. So keeping the idea of like teens being a consumer, when we're looking at Americana, looking back at the 50s, is sort of this emergent of the teenage audience member. Yeah. So all of that would work. And again, if you look back at my previous video, there's lots of context there that you could easily link to Grease too. Okay, so the key scenes that I tend to cover is Summer Nights, obviously, Sandra Dee, because it's really good for looking at a teenage audience, and particularly the setting of a teenage bedroom and so on. Summer Nights, obviously, like I said, is a very key opening sequence and allows you to show off the idea of editing. And then Worst Things I Could Do is great for context because you can link it to teenage pregnancy, that sort of rising in the 1970s, and sort of like these 1970s issues being projected through a 1950s film. And that's something that I definitely should have put on there, which I'm going to do now. So 1970s issues through the lens of the 1950s. Okay. And then obviously I finish with You're the One That I Want, because it allows you to see the development of these characters and also the messages of the film. So that is sort of the end of the Grease section. And then obviously I'm going to go on to Whiplash shortly. But in terms of the comparison question, I'll do a dedicated video on how you can go about structuring it. So hopefully that's useful for now in terms of Grease. And thank you for listening.